Multilateralism, Foreign Policy, and Security in Indo-Pacific. My name is Kanisa. I will be the MC for today. But to cut the time short, I will give the screen to the chair, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. The screen is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sasa. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be invited to this roundtable, and especially since I will be joining the screen with my good friends, and it's not just colleagues but good friends. I won't tell you how long I've known Anne-Marie because we are all very young still. And Professor Kai He, we've also got to know each other for a number of years now. And of course, Mas Dery Aman, I've known him since, just telling my age also, I've known for forever. He's a career diplomat, and now he's made it into ambassador. So this is a very important roundtable. The topic that we are going to talk about is ASEAN multilateralism, foreign policy and security, and Indo-Pacific. A bit of a mouthful, the ASEAN is a very big topic in itself. Multilateralism is also, a topic in itself, foreign policy, and then security and Indo-Pacific. So the focus of the discussions will be on ASEAN. Firstly, we're looking at the contending concepts of the Indo-Pacific. It already started much earlier, before Trump made it popular after his Hanoi speech, but the Japanese has used it since early 2000. The Australians have used it. Indonesia also has used it since 2013, but we have to admit that it only started to be picked up and to be discussed when the US President Trump launched his free and open Indo-Pacific. And then, of course, ASEAN's response to the concept to ensure that the Indo-Pacific region remains inclusive and that the architecture that is built is not exclusionary in nature. And while some countries have embraced the concept of Indo-Pacific, others are less so, notably China and also Russia, regard the concept itself, the terminology is Indo-Pacific, as being politically loaded, as being something that is aimed against China, to contain China. And we during this hour of roundtable discussion, we will be looking at how the concepts have unfolded and how the different stakeholders, particularly Southeast Asian countries, and also other major countries, particularly the United States and China, have responded to this concept. And for this roundtable, we are honored to have three speakers. First is His Excellency Ambassador Dewi Aman, who is the permanent representative of the Republic of Indonesia to ASEAN. And then Professor Kai He from the Griffith University. Selamat datang. Good morning, Mas Dewi. I've just introduced you. So the first speaker will be Ambassador Dewi Aman, who is Indonesia's representative to the to ASEAN. Professor Kai He from Griffith University, and then it's Professor Anne-Marie Murphy from Seton Hall. So without further ado, I would like to invite Ambassador Dewi Aman to give the first presentation. But before we go, I would like to read briefly Mas Dewi's short bio. So His Excellency Ambassador Dewi Aman has been appointed as permanent representative of the Republic of Indonesia to ASEAN, based in Jakarta since 25th of October 2021. Ambassador Dewi Aman is a career diplomat who's been posted to Ottawa, to Geneva, and to Canberra. And he is very experienced with ASEAN because he has been a Deputy Director for ASEAN Political Affairs at the Foreign Ministry, and then Director for ASEAN Dialogue Partners and Interregional Cooperation, also at the Foreign Ministry. And now, of course, he's Indonesia's permanent rep in the at the ASEAN. So, Mas Dery, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Dewi Fortuna Anwar. It's always a pleasure to be in the same event with you, Ibu, and a very good morning to everyone. It is indeed a pleasure and honor for me to be one of the speakers, one of the panelists this morning with the very strategic and important topic of mainly on the Indo-Pacific region. And as Ibu Dewi has described my CV, I hope that what I would like to share this morning is something useful and meaningful to everyone, not only to myself, but other fellow panelists and also all the participants in this morning conference. Ibu Dewi and distinguished participants, let me start by providing what I am going to share with you. It's basically on the strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific region as well as the ASEAN-led mechanism, and then on ASEAN-led multilateralism and the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and then Indonesia's perspective on ASEAN multilateralism, foreign policy and security in the Indo-Pacific. And in the end, I would also like to provide some conclusion based on my presentation this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, Indo-Pacific region, which consists of, in our perspective, is the Asia-Pacific and Indian Ocean. We are fully aware that nowadays the Indo-Pacific region can be seen as a center of economic growth, home to more than half of the world's population. So therefore, it is indeed very strategic for the future of our well-being. And also, it is very important that we are aware Southeast Asia, or ASEAN, lies at the center of the Indo-Pacific region. As Indonesia have reiterated through our president, that the importance of creating peace, stability, as well as inclusive and mutually beneficial cooperation in the Indo-Pacific is clear, loud and clear. And also our Minister for Foreign Affairs, Ibu Retno Marsudi, emphasized that the importance of managing the Indo-Pacific region is to respect international law. It should be the mutual commitment of all countries in the region to ensure that the Indo-Pacific region remains a region of peace, stability, and prosperous. Therefore, in the midst of differing and competing concepts on the Indo-Pacific that we are all witnessing, ASEAN needs to be even more active, even more an active actor in defining the regional architecture. ASEAN unity and centrality must be upheld, and ASEAN views on the promotion of mutual peace, security, and prosperity should overshadow the trend of competition that we all are witnessing in the Indo-Pacific region. Against this backdrop, ASEAN took the lead to have this AOIP, or the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which was introduced and adopted in 2019. Situated in the Indo-Pacific region, competing interests that led to geopolitical and geoeconomic rivalry. And we also see the proliferation of Indo-Pacific concepts from our partners from other countries, from other regions. So therefore, we can see that nowadays there is what we call as AUKUS, Quad, IPEF, and other concepts that we are learning about and keep on monitoring these concepts in the Indo-Pacific region. However, it is clear for Indonesia and for ASEAN that ASEAN itself has our concept of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This ASEAN-led multilateralism refers to inclusive multilateral mechanisms that were initiated by ASEAN, such as the EAS, ARF, APT, ADMM+, and other ASEAN-led mechanisms. We have understood in ASEAN that the importance of preserving peace, stability, security, and prosperity in the region, and in fact, this is the very reason why ASEAN exists. Therefore, cooperation in ASEAN and ASEAN-led mechanisms, which we cooperate and collaborate with a number of external partners, should always be guided by the UN Charter, the ASEAN Charter, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, the EAS Bali Principles, and now we also have the AOIP. The AOIP, we would like to see it that it would reinforce the ASEAN-centered regional architecture in the region. If I may go to the AOIP, there are 4 areas of cooperation, which are maritime cooperation, connectivity, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and economic as well as other possible areas of cooperation. The key elements, it should be seen as a perspective of viewing the Asia-Pacific and Indian Ocean regions not as a contiguous territorial spaces, but as a closely integrated and interconnected region with ASEAN playing a central and strategic role, an Indo-Pacific region of dialogue and cooperation instead of rivalry, an Indo-Pacific region of development and prosperity for all, and the importance of the maritime domain and perspective in the evolving regional architecture. Based on that, Indonesia's emphasized its perspectives on ASEAN multilateralism, foreign policy, and security in the Indo-Pacific region. We, Indonesia, exercise our foreign policy through multilateralism in the context of ASEAN cooperation. Major world powers continue their efforts to increase their spheres of influence in the region. This trust would only hinder the creation of a conducive environment. Indonesia is the main proponent of the AOIP. We would like to view the AOIP as the basis for cooperation between ASEAN and its external partners, as well as among ASEAN's external partners themselves in the Indo-Pacific region. ASEAN and its partners will be implementing the AOIP through concrete initiatives, programs, activities in the 4 areas of cooperation, as I have mentioned before. And therefore, again, Indonesia is the main proponent of the AOIP concept. We have the vision that stability, the culture of dialogue, collaboration, and respect for international law will always be upheld in the Indo-Pacific region. Indonesia continues to push ASEAN to come up with its, as Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi puts it, disruptive innovations, which is to step away from ASEAN's comfort zone, but staying relevant in responding to clear and present challenges. The AOIP is inclusive and open for cooperation with all interested parties, including external partners of ASEAN. As a conclusion, Ibu Dewi and ladies and gentlemen, first, major world powers continue their efforts to increase their spheres of influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Therefore, it is eminent, it is clear, it is strategic and important that ASEAN unity and centrality must be preserved and observed. Indonesia, as the main proponent of the AYP, strives to help create and maintain peace and stability, fostering a habit or culture of dialogue, strengthening collaboration, and bolster the respect for international law, and ensure that it will always be upheld in the Indo-Pacific region. Given the major power dynamics in the region, Indonesia strives to convert such power rivalry into cooperation. So in essence, I would like to stress and underline that in the end, it's all about ASEAN's role, ASEAN's centrality, and ASEAN's unity within the Indo-Pacific region that would provide all the hopes and vision and expectations that the Indo-Pacific region would really contribute or provide peace and stability and a prosper situation and condition for all of us, notwithstanding that a number or a lot of countries in the region and outside the region have their interests in the Indo-Pacific region. So again, it's how ASEAN can manage, can be in the central, in the driving seat of its own region, in the ASEAN region and beyond. Beyond is, of course, the Indo-Pacific region. So those are some of the points that I would like to share this morning. And I believe that the short presentation that I have provided is something to take as a food for thought and for further discussion. And therefore, through our discussions in this conference, we are hoping that we can get further ideas and innovative ideas for the well-being of ASEAN, of our ASEAN region, as well as the Indo-Pacific region. Once again, thank you very much, Ibu Dewi Fortuna Anwar, my fellow panelists, and ladies and gentlemen, participants of this morning conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dewi Aman. I've not been as strict with you because I suppose we need to give you the sufficient time to provide to present your presentations on the importance of the Indo-Pacific region and the importance of the ASEAN centrality and you said that there is a belief and a hope that the role that ASEAN plays will contribute to managing the various flashpoints and contestations within the Indo-Pacific. This is clearly the hope that ASEAN has, but we are living in a real world where we have hope, but we also have to face a lot of realities, and great power rivalry and is a fact of life. And also the internal problems of ASEAN is also a fact of life. So I would like now to invite a very renowned scholar who has written on ASEAN, on the Indo-Pacific, on China, and so on. So our next panelist would be, according to the terms of reference, is Professor Kai He. So it's not Anne-Marie. I was wrong there. Sorry. So Professor Kai He is well known to all students of international relations. He is currently Professor of International Relations and Director of the Center for Governance and Public Policy at the Griffith University in Australia. and he was an Australian Research Council Future Fellow in 2017, 2020. But for most of us, especially students of international relations, Kai's books and articles that are that really made Professor Kai He is one of the thinkers or theorists of international relations. His latest his earlier book, Institutional Balancing in the Asia Pacific: Economic Interdependence and China's Rise, it's actually a Bible for all of us here. We have a lot of us have to go and read that, and he's written also about China's crisis behavior, political survival, and foreign policy, and so on. So without further ado, Kai, I would like to invite you to give your 10 minutes thoughts and critiques, including of your dissecting ASEAN.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for your very kind introduction. It is my great honor and pleasure to participate in this roundtable discussion with esteemed policy practitioners and also scholars in the field. The Indo-Pacific concept and the policy is a very timely and important topic in the studies of regional security. Today, I'll be happy to share my scholarly view, on this topic. In the field, there are two popular arguments. One is some realist scholars argue that the U.S. promotion of the concept and its later Indo-Pacific strategy aim to contain China's rise. It seems the Chinese policymakers share this realist understanding of the Indo-Pacific concept. Up to the present day, China still refuses to accept or use this concept in its official documents. Second, some constructivist scholars argue that the Indo-Pacific concept demonstrates a new value-based grouping in which the supporters of the concept appear to embrace similar democratic values and political systems. China, on the other hand, apparently does not belong to this grouping. Although both arguments reveal some elements of truth, I would like to argue that they are not good enough, as a scholar always say they're not good enough, and can be even misleading in terms of policy. It might be true that the US Indo-Pacific strategy aims to balance against China's rise. However, we should not forget that this balancing strategy is different from the traditional military-based balancing. It may be also true that some countries, like Australia and the US, they share some democratic values. However, we should not forget that this kind of value-based argument is difficult to sell to most Asian countries, including some ASEAN states. Therefore, I would like to use my institutional balancing argument to share some light on the regional dynamics around this Indo-Pacific concept and the policy. My institutional balancing argument has two key points. First, the rise of the Indo-Pacific concept reflects a new wave of multilateralism in the region, which I termed contested multilateralism 2.0. This is to differentiate it from the ASEAN-led multilateralism 1.0 of the post-Cold War era. Second, states have adopted different institutional balancing strategies in order to pursue power and influence during the current period of international order transition. Unlike the multilateralism 1.0, which was led by ASEAN, great powers such as the US and China have become the major actors in this new wave of multilateralism. Therefore, we have witnessed multilateralisms at war after the 2008 global financial crisis. For example, there has been intense competition between the newly established China-led AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the existing multilateral financial institutions such as the IMF, World Bank, and ADB, dominated by the US and other Western countries. In addition, we have seen some institutional competition between China-backed but ASEAN-led RCEP and the Obama time TPP, as well as between China's Belt Road Initiative and the various infrastructure financial programs proposed by the US, Japan, EU, and Australia. The Indo-Pacific concept and the later Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States are manifestations of the US institutional balancing against China's increasing power and influence in the region. It is an exclusive institutional balancing strategy through which the US forms a series of non-China participating multilateral institutions to alienate and exclude China, and relies on the cohesion and the unity of the grouping to exert pressures on China and also counterbalance China's influence in the region. The newly established Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the revived Quad, as well as the possible Quad Plus security groupings, are typical exclusive institutional balancing efforts against China, through which China is not only excluded, but also isolated from various regional rulemaking and agenda-setting negotiations and discussions. It is a rational international relation or institutional strategy from the US perspective, because this exclusive institutional arrangement will help re-establish US leadership and hegemony in the region. However, this exclusive institutional balancing strategy means that the regional countries, especially the ASEAN states, will face tough decisions in picking sides between US and China. It will also intensify regional divisions and institutional competition among nations. As a response, China will be expected to strengthen its institutional balancing efforts through existing institutions such as ARF, EAS, RCEP, or by establishing some new institutions in order to counter the US institutional offensive. As far as ASEAN is concerned, its position is quite tricky because it is not in ASEAN's interest to pick sides between US and China. Although ASEAN seemed to embrace the concept of the Indo-Pacific by releasing its first ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific around 2 years ago, it emphasized both its centrality role and the inclusiveness principle in the regional affairs. It is very different from the US exclusive institutional balancing against China. If ASEAN can include both US and China into its own Indo-Pacific grouping, it will be very successful, inclusive institutional balancing strategy in the region. It will be also very conducive to regional stability and peace for the long run. However, how ASEAN can play its central role in forging an inclusive institutional setting, as well as skillfully manage its relation with both China and the US, is still not very clear. There are two implications of this institutional balancing-based contested multilateralism for regional security in the future. First, we will see more institutional competition among states, especially between US and China. Unlike the traditional military-based balancing, institutional balancing will be less violent and more peaceful, although it may result in intensified diplomatic tension among states. Second, in my view, ASEAN can play a very active and even leading role in this new wave of multilateralism by initiating some new institutions or reforming the existing ones so that it can set agendas and forge the rules in line with ASEAN's interests. ASEAN should not take a wait-and-see attitude, just accept what the unfolding US-China competition will bring to the region. Instead, ASEAN can use institutional balancing strategies to manage a more peaceful order transition in the region. In my view, regional peace should not be dominated by great powers alone. Regional peace and stability will call for ASEAN's institutional balancing in the region. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kai. I have to tell you that your participation here is much anticipated by all of the IR scholars. So that lecture on exclusive institutional balancing and inclusive international balancing, the difference between the US and ASEAN, you made it very, very clear again, and the hope that ASEAN will continue to be able to play this inclusive institutional balancing act, as Ambassador Dewi Aman said. ASEAN needs to be proactive. So the ball is very much in ASEAN court whether it is able to do that, versus the very increasingly robust Quad and AUKUS, which is very unashamedly an exclusive institutional balancing strategy against China. Now, last but not least, I would like to invite Professor Anne-Marie Murphy, who is a professor at the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. This is in New York, and where she directs the Center for Foreign Policy Studies. And Marie is also adjunct senior research scholar at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute at Columbia University, and has written widely on U.S. foreign policy towards Asia, and is very knowledgeable about the region. So, Anne, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Ibu Dewi, for that very kind introduction, and to the conference organizers for inviting me. It was my pleasure to be here, and I attended the opening ceremony on Thursday. It was my first in-person conference in 3 years, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. As Ibu Dewi mentioned in the introduction, the topic for this panel is extremely long, right? ASEAN institution building, the Indo-Pacific, etc. And so what I wanted to do was focus on the terms of reference that we were given, which is to discuss the significance of the Indo-Pacific outlook, and then to examine how ASEAN and Southeast Asian states are responding. And my bottom line argument is that I think over the last 5 years, we've seen a significant shift in the part of the ASEAN and many Southeast Asian states toward the US Indo-Pacific strategy, in contrast to the earlier very staunch opposition, and that this change is driven in large part because there have been significant adjustments made to accommodate ASEAN's interests on the part of particularly US actors, and how they've developed concrete programs with ASEAN in mind. So I am going to be speaking from a US perspective because, although, as Ibu Dewi mentioned, the Indo-Pacific was announced by Japan, and there were earlier reincarnations. It's really since Trump promulgated it in 2017 that it took on life. So if I can have my first slide, please. I want to point out, may I have the first slide? Thank you. That when Trump promulgated the Indo-Pacific, his free and open in 2017, in the context of rising competition with China, it was viewed as very much an anti-China response, right? The US said it wanted freedom of coercion, i.e. juxtaposed to China's use of force in the South China Sea. Freedom of navigation, as opposed to China's building militarization of artificial islands and anti-area access denial strategy, kind of a US standing for a rules-based order rather than makes right violations of the UN law of the sea, free and fair trade, as opposed to predatory economic and debt trap diplomacy. And so with the very loud way in which this was criticized against China by US diplomats, it was very much seen, as Professor Kai Hayes said, as an exclusive attempt to contain China. So may I have the second slide, please? How did Southeast Asia respond? Well, on the one hand, many of the principles in the free and open Indo-Pacific are shared by ASEAN. They do want a rule-based order and freedom of navigation, et cetera, et cetera. However, the very anti-Chinese sentiment in it led to a pushback, right? Southeast Asia, yes, is happy that, as Ambassador Daryaman said, the geostrategic importance of Southeast Asia stands out, right? It is the heart of the Indo-Pacific. But this raises Sino-US tensions, it threatens ASEAN cohesion and centrality, and clearly ASEAN wants to be able to devise, as the both previous speakers indicated, the rules of the region and have ASEAN play a much greater role and not have outsiders do that. So initially, then, as Ambassador Dewi Aman said, ASEAN under Indonesia's leadership took the lead in fomenting the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which avoids the word free, which China views as anti-China, and calls for an inclusive Indo-Pacific in which all play a role, okay? So, as Rizal Sukma has said, the ASEAN Indo-Pacific was, in short, a response to growing external pressure that threatened ASEAN's unity, undermines ASEAN relevance, and had the potential to limit its centrality. So what have we seen since then? May I have the third slide, please? I think under the Biden administration, you have had a much stronger convergence of principle. The Biden administration has taken stock of ASEAN interest. It has changed course so that it issued an Indo-Pacific strategy, not a free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which were buzzlines that raised tensions with ASEAN and China. It abandoned Trump's zero-sum sense of competition. So if you listen to Kurt Campbell, the head of the Indo-Pacific and a key architect of US policy, he will say that the US recognizes quite clearly that any initiative that is simply designed for competition with China is going to have difficulty getting cooperation in Asia. So there is a recognition then that the very zero-sum competition with China simply was antithetical to US interests. And so you've seen a shift then in accord with ASEAN principles. You've seen in the Indo-Pacific strategy the Biden administration emphasized calls for an inclusive region. It emphasizes ASEAN centrality. In the final communique of the recent US Special ASEAN Summit, it states that the US Indo-Pacific strategy and the ASEAN Indo-Pacific strategy share fundamental principles in promoting an open, inclusive, and rules-based architecture. And so you've seen now ASEAN and the US have this kind of convergence on principles. And I want to just flag that I think that the US clearly knows China is resident in the region. It cannot exclude China. What it is attempting to do is change behavior, right? So obviously, we have seen that kind of rapprochement between the US and ASEAN, and you've seen a lot of concrete initiatives coming out, as we saw with the 150 million of new US ASEAN initiatives at the summit. Now, I just want to touch on the Quad. As Professor Kai-He mentioned, you are seeing new institutions. In the 2017, when the Quad, the US security dialogue with the US, Japan, India, and Australia were revived, many in ASEAN feared that it was a military alliance that would destabilize the region. Because even though many Southeast Asian countries, as we know, are concerned about China, they prefer to engage China through ASEAN organizations, through diplomacy, not through hard power. And so what we've seen over the last 5 years is concerted efforts by the Quad members that, A, this is not an alliance. And we've also seen at the recent Quad summit commitments to work with ASEAN in practical ways. They have also in their opening, or excuse me, in their closing statement at the summit, says that the Quad looks forward to engaging with ASEAN, recognizes ASEAN centrality, and wants to work forward in cooperative and practical ways. And so what we've seen now is that the Quad is putting forth a whole range of functional cooperative initiatives. So we see this in vaccines, we see it in the area of climate, emerging technology, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all areas that ASEAN has stated as priority areas of interest for Southeast Asian states as they recover from the pandemic, et cetera. And so this new framing then of the Quad, not just as a collection of democracies with shared concerns about China, but as a potential source of public goods for Southeast Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific. And what we've seen is that these initiatives have changed perceptions of the Quad among Southeast Asian states, according to the ISIS survey's State of Southeast Asia. So if we look at 2020, only 45.8% of Southeast Asians approved of the Quad. However, by 2022, that number had risen to 58%. And so in conclusion, I think that what we've seen over the past 5 years is a real evolution of dynamics between these new Indo-Pacific concept and institutions such as the Quad, and that there is a growing convergence. And this convergence is a function of accommodation and adjustment and intensive dialogue between outside actors and ASEAN and Southeast Asian states. So I would like to reiterate the conclusions of both Ambassador Derry Amon and Professor Kai-He, that ASEAN has a significant scope and a critical opportunity here to really forward through with its original mission, as the ambassador said, of creating the rules of order, because I think we have seen a demonstration of willingness on the part of the outside actors to take ASEAN's concerns into account and change their policies to meet them. So on that note, I would like to end. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Anne-Marie. Quite optimistic note that the Quad
I like
itself
to be
is. That's the Quad itself is trying to accommodate the ASEAN's concerns, that it is not simply a security alliance focusing on hard security, but also is trying to develop some functional cooperation. Now, I'm supposed also, besides being a chair, I'm also going to be a discussant while waiting for, if there are questions from the chats, I hope that Anissa will alert me. We only have about 13 more minutes. So I will just ask some devil's advocates questions, starting from Anne-Marie's rather optimistic read of this. That after the ASEAN-US summit in the United States, this emphasis on ASEAN centrality. So the constructivist side of it, as Kai would say, the constructivist Indo-Pacific seems to be working. But after that, the Quad had a summit in Tokyo, and the US unfolded its Indo-Pacific economic framework, and all of us read that as a rival, an attempt, at least, to put an alternative to provide countries in the region such a bit of choice, besides the BRI. But the reality is, the main narrative is not U.S. ASEAN relations, or what in itself, but people in the region do see ASEAN still mainly is a function. U.S. ASEAN relation is still a function of its policy towards China. So I would ask all three speakers, whether this realist world of hard power competitions, military power, economic power, and Graham Allison wrote, it is inevitable. The US and China will forever be strategic competitors, and the US will never be willing, as an incumbent power, will never willingly give way to China, and China will continue to try, to get that place from the United States. So regardless of this constructivist work that the ASEAN and all the dialogue partners are trying to make, are we really going to be seriously able to change the course of history? Because realists would say in the past it always led to conflict. No. So are we, the ASEAN's hope, as Ambassador Dery Aman said, we want to play this role of mediating, inclusive institutional balancing, as Kai would say. Is this really something that is realistic? Is it something that ASEAN could really do? So maybe I'll ask the hard question to Kai first, and then Mas Dery and Anne can answer.
Okay, thank you very much for Anne-Marie's presentation. Also, I really enjoy Ambassador Dery Aman's presentation about the official Indonesian position on this issue. There are very two quick points. I agree with Anne-Marie's observation. The U.S. and the Biden's administration really try to accommodate ASEAN's concern in terms of in the Indo-Pacific region. But I would like to say there's a clear distinction or difference between what the political leaders said and what the political leaders have done. Okay, so although Biden said we want to stick to the inclusiveness principle, however, in reality, as David just said, the Quad is clearly targeted China, and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework excludes China. So basically, the difference between what the U.S., the Biden said, and what the Biden has done, through this Indo-Pacific strategy. The second point is I agree with Ambassador. ASEAN is very important, and in terms of maintain the regional stability and also revive the multilateralism. But in my view, just a scholar view, ASEAN need to do more, because, as I said, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is the first international organization with the name of Indo-Pacific in it. However, there are some discussion. I think Indonesia shows some concerns about whether this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is target China or not. However, in reality, China is not a part of it. A lot of seven ASEAN countries is in that institution. So in reality, although this institution may still emphasize inclusiveness principle, but in reality, as Ibu David said, in a realist world, China is not a part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So in the eyes of the Chinese leaders, it targets China. That's just really simple facts. So I think ASEAN actually, if we go back to, if you can rewind the history, ASEAN can have a strong position saying, to the US, if you do not want to include China, it's not inclusiveness, it's kind of not, stick to the inclusiveness principle. We do not want to participate. Then ASEAN can play a more important role in terms of to reshape this kind of Indo-Pacific institution. Okay, just a scholarly view, maybe naive in terms of from a policy perspective, but in my view, ASEAN can play a more important role, more active role. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now, so I'll ask now Ambassador Dery Aman, to respond both to the earlier presentations of Professor Kai and Professor Anne-Marie, but also there are also questions from the participants from the audience about the concept of ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. How realistic is it, in the context of the changing dynamics? We have all this normative language there, but in terms of the real world, how is it really possible to contain and cooperate at the same time? For us, Indonesia does it all the time, but you can, Pak Dery, you can respond to the remarks from Kai as well as answer some of these questions.
Once again, thank you very much, Ibu Dewi. Very interesting indeed. To my observation on the presentation by Professor Kai He and Professor Anne-Marie Murphy. Basically, I could say that Indonesia is along the lines to the general thoughts that both of them have in respect to what is happening in the Indo-Pacific region, the dynamics, the development, and the possible near future happenings, and also on how the US is now under the President Biden administration looking at and towards the Indo-Pacific region, as well as the difference of foreign policy that the US administration is now undertaking if we compare with the previous one. So, Ibu Dewi, first, let me just say that it's very, it may not be something that we all expected, but it is very interesting that the Indo-Pacific region is a region where all major players, even non-major players, are interested in. So why is it like that? Of course, there are geo-economic consideration and also geopolitical consideration. But scholars may also see it as simple as how the US or the Western countries try to respond to the presence of China in the region. So that is basically what is happening. And based on that, everyone is trying to put forward their responses and their thoughts, ideas, frameworks on how the Indo-Pacific region can be managed. And I believe that everyone wants to avoid the competition, the rivalry would escalate to conflicts. So I think that is the bottom line, that at least for Indonesia and ASEAN is trying to manage by coming up with a concept, which is the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which again, I think our two panelists has also underlined that it may be the only concept available for the region, for the Indo-Pacific region, that is inclusive, that is open-ended. That is why ASEAN proposes somehow a different concept, that we would like to put cooperation and collaboration in the forefront in response to the dynamics development of the competition, the rivalry of the Indo-Pacific region between the major players. So I think this is an important point for everyone to take note, that the AOIP, the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, is something which is the only concept which provides the framework for cooperation and collaboration for all countries interested. And
I have to
furthermore,
cut you
yes,
short, Pak Larry.
yes,
You only got 2
okay.
minutes, so yeah, right.
And also the question whether it's realistic. Well, as Professor Kaihi has mentioned, for ASEAN, it is, of course, a great challenge. ASEAN has its own complexities with the influence from other countries towards individual ASEAN member states. But as ASEAN as a whole, we are all committed that ASEAN should be united. We should put forward our ASEAN centrality, and it needs to be seen whether the AOIP, which is being put forward by ASEAN, can offer something different for the benefit of the Indo-Pacific region. It is a challenge for ASEAN, but as far as Indonesia is concerned, Indonesia will never stop trying to put ASEAN as the central, as the driving seat in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you, Ibu Dewi.
Thank you. And now, Anne-Marie, you've got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. So I just want to say that, yes, I was putting forth a somewhat optimistic perspective, but because we have seen changes, but also because, and this gets me back to the critical point of how is competition inevitable? Dewi, you know, cited Graham Allison, but there were a number of cases in his study where you didn't get all-out war. And why was that? Because strategic competition was managed by a focus on key rules, key norms, and both sides adjusting to one another. Is that going to be possible in the Indo-Pacific? I don't want to focus on the great powers because we want to focus on ASEAN, but I do think that ASEAN can shape outside behavior. It has certainly done that in the past. We see it happening now. And I actually think that this is a critical moment, perhaps, if, as the ambassador said, ASEAN can enhance its centrality, unity, and put forth a vision that outsiders are very much wanting to follow and work with ASEAN and follow its lead. And so in my optimistic view, because I think conferences should end on an optimistic note, certainly hope that we can see more of that in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. And while we are living in a realist world, I believe that constructivism should not just remain in the domain of scholarly analysis, but also that this is a living reality that we are working on. And I think that the ASEAN countries, Indonesia and ASEAN countries, are trying to shape both the real world and also contribute to scholarly thinking about this. And we hope that talking about peace and security is not just an academic exercise, because what happened in Europe, what happened in Russian invasion and Ukraine, I think should be a wake-up call to us, that mistakes, miscalculations can be made, and peace cannot be taken for granted. And given the fact that, as been mentioned by Ms. Derry, reiterating the importance of the dynamism of the Indo-Pacific region, where the world GDP, the engines of growth are in the Indo-Pacific region, and as the most of the population of the world live in the Indo-Pacific region, we cannot afford to have miscalculations and brinkmanship. And this is it's very important. While exclusive institutional balancing is a fact of life, but we hope that the strength of a more inclusive institutional balancing can also, be an important counterpoint. But here again, the ball is in ASEAN's court, and both all external friends are now putting a lot of expectations, not just on ASEAN, but Indonesia's chairmanship next year, to see, while we have the concept of ASEAN Outlook on the Pacific, and we have the 4 points of 4 main pillars of the IOP, we want to see, how does it actually work? Because ASEAN has stressed that it's not going to be a new regional mechanism. It has to work within existing mechanisms, not just an ASEAN regional mechanisms, clearly, but there's also IORA, there's SCP, and so on, and various bilateralism and multilateralisms. The devil is in the details, and it's up to Ms. Derry and friends at the Foreign Ministry to ensure that IOP is not just a dead letter, and that something concrete will come about, so that all the various initiatives will be able to refer and work closely, with concrete projects within the framework of IOP. So I'm afraid I've taken about 4 minutes longer of the time, but I thought I have to get that message across. And thank you very much to all of the speakers, to Ambassador Derry Aman, to Professor Kahir, and Professor Anne-Marie. I'll return the screen to Sasa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar, and also our prestigious speaker, Professor Anne-Marie, Professor Kahir, and also His Excellency Derry Aman. Thank you very much for this very rich roundtable. We hope that we can see you in other events. On behalf of the committee, we say thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you taken pictures, Kasa? Did you take photo?
I think it's already done by the committee, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Kanisha, is this being recorded?
You can leave the virtual room.
Is the whole event recorded?
Is it recorded?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think yes. By the committee said yes, but on the whether it will be uploaded on our BRIN channel, I will confirm it later, and I will get back to you on that.
Yeah, I hope that it will be recorded, because what's been said, by the speakers are quite important.
I fully agree with you, ma'am, because I already said to Ibu Atika whether it can be uploaded to BRIN channel, but I haven't got the answer for that.
Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, at least if not being uploaded, as Professor Anne-Marie have asked, it could also be sent to us, the 5 of us, for our reference, personal reference.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Please do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
See you in
everybody.
person.
Bye, Vivi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.